The old farmer held his last seed in his trembling hand. Everyone begged him to eat it before he starved. But instead, he buried it in the dry earth. Why would a man plant his only chance to survive? 3 years without rain, the rivers disappeared. The fields turned to stone. Families left the village one after another. Only one old farmer refused to leave. His name was Elias. Every morning, before the first light reached the hills, Elias stepped out of his small wooden home. While the village still slept, he walked toward the land everyone else had abandoned. The cold morning wind carried only dust, not the smell of fresh soil, not the sound of flowing water, only silence. The villagers believed nothing could ever grow there again. They had stopped believing long before the rain stopped, but Elias wasn't looking for crops. He was searching for something much harder to lose: hope. That evening, as the burning sun disappeared behind the empty hills, Elias slowly returned to his little wooden cottage. His tiny house held almost nothing: a wooden table, a worn-out chair, and memories that refused to fade. In the far corner of the room sat an old wooden chest, untouched for years. He knelt beside it, as though he already knew what waited inside. Taking a slow breath, he lifted the heavy lid. Inside was a small cloth pouch. With trembling hands, Elias untied the faded string. Slowly, he poured the contents into his palm. Only one tiny seed remained, the last seed his beloved wife had saved before she passed away. For a long moment, he simply stared at it, as if he were holding his entire future. Outside, the dry wind continued to howl. Tomorrow, he would have to make a choice, one that could save him or cost him everything. The next morning, word spread quickly through the village. Elias still has one seed. The hungry villagers hurried toward his little farmhouse. Some came with concern, others came with desperation. No one came with hope. One elderly woman stepped forward. Her voice trembled. "Please, don't plant it. Eat the seed. You need to live." Another man shook his head. "Nothing grows anymore. Planting it is the same as throwing your life away." Elias listened, without interrupting, without arguing. Then, he quietly smiled. Elias looked at every face, at the fear, the hunger, the hopelessness. He understood all of it. He had felt that same fear every single night. He slowly opened his hand, so everyone could see the last seed. Then he spoke, softly. "If I eat this seed, only one man survives today." He paused, looked toward the empty fields, and tightened his grip around the tiny seed. "But if I plant it," he whispered, without taking his eyes off the barren land. The villagers held their breath. Not a single voice, not a single step, only the wind moved across the broken land. Elias slowly walked toward the center of his field, the same field everyone else had already given up on. He knelt down, placed one hand on the dry earth, and closed his eyes. Quietly, he whispered, "Thank you for every harvest we ever had." Then, without another word, he opened his hand. The tiny seed slipped into the cracked soil. The villagers stared. Some lowered their heads. Others quietly wept. To them, the last chance had just disappeared beneath the earth. That night, the village slept with heavy hearts. No one believed they would ever see another harvest. But Elias could not sleep. Something kept pulling him back to the field. He walked through the darkness, following only faith. He stopped exactly where the seed had been planted. He slowly knelt. He placed both hands on the dry earth, closed his eyes, and whispered, "I have done all I can." Then, a cool breeze touched his face. For the first time in 3 years, Elias slowly opened his eyes. The breeze had stopped, but the silence felt different. He looked up, toward the sky. Dark clouds were gathering. Slowly. Silently. He couldn't remember the last time he had seen clouds like these. A tiny drop fell onto his weathered hand. He froze, then another, and another, until the sky could hold back no longer. Within seconds, the gentle rain became a steady shower. For the first time in 3 long years, the thirsty earth drank without fear. Elias closed his eyes, not to escape the rain, but to feel every single drop. The villagers rushed outside, unable to believe their eyes. Children laughed as raindrops touched their faces. No one spoke. No one cheered. Some moments are simply too powerful for words. Elias looked toward the place where he had buried the last seed. The rain continued to fall, and beneath the wet soil, life had quietly begun. 3 days passed, and the rain continued to visit the valley. The cracked earth slowly softened, the empty river began to flow again, and the dusty air felt clean for the first time in years. Every sunrise, Elias walked quietly to the place where he had planted the last seed. The villagers followed from a distance, waiting to see whether faith had truly changed anything. Then, on the 4th morning, Elias stopped, smiled, and gently knelt beside the wet soil. Elias gently brushed away the wet soil with his fingertips. The villagers leaned closer, hardly daring to breathe. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, breaking through the dark earth, a tiny green sprout reached toward the morning light. It was small, fragile, almost impossible to see. But after 3 years of drought, it was the most beautiful thing anyone in the village had ever seen. Tears filled their eyes, not because the sprout was large, but because hope was alive again. The days turned into weeks, and the tiny sprout never stopped growing. Gentle rain continued to fall, the river filled once again, and the thirsty earth slowly came back to life. Soon, fresh green shoots appeared across the fields where nothing had grown for years. The villagers returned to their farms with renewed strength. They worked side by side, smiling, laughing, and believing again. Elias watched quietly from the edge of the field, knowing that the greatest harvest was not the crops. It was the hope growing inside every heart. Years later, children would run through those same fields without ever knowing how close the village had come to losing everything. They laughed beneath the shade of trees that had once been lifeless, crossed the river that had once been dry, and gathered harvests that had begun with a single seed. Whenever they asked how the village had been saved, the elders always told the same story. They spoke of an old farmer named Elias, a man who refused to eat his last seed when fear told him to. They said that courage is not believing you cannot fail. Courage is choosing to do what is right, even when failure seems certain. Elias never called himself a hero. He simply believed that hope must be planted before it can ever be harvested. Elias picked up a single seed from the fresh harvest and placed it gently into the hand of a young child. The child looked at the tiny seed and smiled. Elias smiled back and said, "Never be afraid to plant what seems too small. Sometimes, the smallest seed grows into the greatest blessing." The child closed his hand around the seed, and in that quiet moment, the future of the village was no longer written in fear. It was written in hope. The greatest victories begin with the smallest acts of faith. When fear tells you to hold on, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is plant your last seed. If this story touched your heart, leave a seedling in the comments to show that you still believe in hope. Share this story with someone who feels like giving up, and don't forget to subscribe to Glowing Flame, where every story is a spark to help your inner light shine brighter.